Hello everyone, welcome to the 9th session of Entrepreneurship Academy. So today we are glad to have another guest speakers who has rich experience at the States. So Dr. Yiwu He is the Senior Advisor to the President and Chief Innovation Officer of Hong Kong U. Dr. He have been the Deputy Director and Senior Program Officers at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, Senior Vice Presidents and Global R&D Heads at BIG, Global Heads of Human Biomarker Centers at GSK, and also the Board Director of P4 Medicine Institute. So without further ado, let me pass the time to Dr. He. Hello, Dr. He.
Hi. Thank you very much, Taurus, for your introduction. Good evening, everyone. As Taurus introduced that I'm currently the Chief Innovation Officer at the University of Hong Kong. He also mentioned quite some titles I have held in the past. I just want to add a little bit more in terms of my experience, then I explain to you why. I actually left Shanghai after I graduated from Fudan University and then went to US for my PhD. I went to Boston and got my PhD and then went to Harvard Medical School at the postdoc, start to learning the life science and develop a drug, particularly in the area of cancer, which is very different from what I did when I was a student, a college student at Fudan University. My major was actually theoretical physics when I was at Fudan. After I did quite some work in life science as a postdoc, I continued to work as a junior faculty at Harvard Medical School, continued to study the cancer and develop the cancer drug. And then eventually I thought the pharmaceutical company might be the best place for me to really work on drug development. That's how I got to the GSK. And then later, you heard Taurus already introduced me that I worked at the GSK for quite a while, more than 10 years, and then move on to be the Deputy Director at the Gates Foundation, responsible for the global health, which in Gates Foundation's term mostly means the infectious disease plus maternal neonatal care. I spent 8.5 years there and worked directly under Bill Gates, which helped me really learn a lot and understand many global issues, particularly in the area of infectious diseases. And then about 3 years ago, I moved on to become the Senior Vice President and Global Head of R&D of a company headquartered in Shenzhen, China, which is called BGI. It is the world's largest genomic company. So started from there, after I spending 31 years in the United States, I start to have exposure to companies in Shenzhen, in China, in the Great Bay Area. And then in January, I joined the University of Hong Kong. The reason I sort of spend some of my time in sharing with you my experience is that I want you to see that how a very mixed experience and to some degree jumping from one field to the other, jumping from academia to industry, then to the charity, and then go back to the industry, and then come back to the university, etc., actually helped me to think and have some lesson and experience that learned for being entrepreneur. So this is why I called my presentation this evening at To Be or Not to Be, and I particularly is going to focusing on some thoughts around the entrepreneur's world. I'm going to move on to my second slides. So can you see my slides well?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm going to start share with you a bit about To Be or Not to Be, which is the title of my presentation. What I mean is that to be an entrepreneur is not an easy thing, especially for a startup. When you just start a company, you certainly, if you are the co-founder, you are the boss. But at the same time, due to many constraints you have, You could be also a secretary. You could be also an accountant. You could be also your legal advisor. You also have to go out to beg people to give you the money, right? So that's quite something that's very demanding, especially for a new graduate from college. I think the very first things you want to think, if you haven't started a startup yet, is to think very carefully. If you want to be an entrepreneur, knowing that it's a very tough job, it's a lot of challenge, it has a lot of risk. Of course, it also has a lot of reward. So how do you think? What will help you to make a decision in terms of to be or not to be an entrepreneur? So I put some facts on the table to share with you or to discuss with you in terms of how many different directions we could look to help us to make a decision to be entrepreneur or not. For the reason that if you want to be entrepreneur, certainly you want to be successful. So what are the most important facts for a startup success? Well, a lot of time people say, well, it's money, it's the funding. But if you look at this slide is not from me. I basically copied it from a VC. And I think this is the slides being used by most of VCs worldwide. Don't look at the number in a very accurate way. It just gives you a sense in terms of how important those facts are. So if you look at funding, which for most people, when you just start a startup, you will say, wow, funding is the most important thing. But if you look at this, and that's agreed by most of VC, venture capitalists, funding actually, it's among all the 5 facts I put on the table here, funding actually is the least important. What is the most important? The most important fact is actually the timing. So timing is very important. You cannot, if you are behind, certainly you are too late, right? I mean, for example, in China, if you want to start something similar to Taobao, it will be very challenging because it's already, in a way, the market is completely controlled by a few giants there. So you want to go into that area to provide or to create an e-commerce platform. You are a little bit late, but you also cannot be too early. If you're too early, the society actually is not ready for that. So there are a lot of stories that people fail because they are much early. Steve Jobs, who is the founder of the Apple, you heard about him, who actually failed quite miserably when he just started with the very first sets of smartphone. No matter how Apple phone is successful nowadays, when he just started his first version, which was called a Newton, it felt miserable. The reason is that it was way ahead of time. At the time, the internet was not fast enough. The application is not there. People haven't heard about app at all. So there are a lot of things that just not ready yet at that time for him to start a smartphone business. So the timing is really important. The second thing is actually team. I think for most of you who have been working with Lawrence, Torres, of those at the iDendron, you should have already built a sense that team is very important. At the end of the day, people always say, at the end of the day, it's the people. It's the people who make a company successful. And for the VC, a lot of time we say a good team can make a so-so idea very successful. And a so-so team can make a very good idea fail. There are tons of stories about those principles. So team is the second most important factor to become, to start a successful startup. And then the third one is actually idea. Idea, a lot of time people will say, wow, this is a clever idea. This is a smart idea. Well, you are very smart. Actually, smart idea are not that valuable. There are tons of smart ideas. There are tons of smart people there. So the idea, they're important, but they are not as important as most people realize. I think, to a certain degree, the forced recognition of idea probably is in the same range as the funding and the importance of funding. As most people feel, funding is important, but it's not that important. And then the fourth important fact is the business model. Business model is very, very critical. If I use a search engine as an example, at the time when Google just started, there were tons of competition there. Microsoft were doing a lot of searching. At the time, I remember there were at least more than 10 search engines there. So if you start a new search engine, it's at a time, you actually need a very, very good business model to be successful. Otherwise, it's very, very hard to compete against Microsoft, etc. So Google actually is the very first company created a business model that make internet content free to everybody. The free internet started from Google, which at the beginning, nobody believed it. It's a common sense that if you provide something, if you sell something, they cannot be safe, they cannot be free. If they are free, you cannot make money. If you cannot make money, you are not going to be successful business. So Google is the one demonstrate actually the free business model of providing internet content works. So business model is very, very critical. And then the last one is the funding. Certainly you will need money to get you started. So if you look at all those five facts, you really want to ask yourself when you want to start a company, is the timing right? 中国人 if I can use some Chinese here, 中国人也有这么一个说法，就是天时地利人和 right? 天时 that's the timing. So 天时 is the most important thing. So you really want to ask yourself, am I going to start a startup? Is the timing right? Am I too late or am I too early? Or am I just about to ride on the wave? So if you just ride on the wave, that's great. Your timing is right. And the second thing you really want to ask if you have the right team. Nowadays, it's very, very hard for a single person to be successful. Everybody needs someone to help you. So to have a good team is very, very important. A good team doesn't necessarily mean that every member in the team is a genius. It's important to recognize everybody in the team has different type of skill set, have different type of experience, so they complement each other's experience and skill. So, for example, you don't want two person, especially at the very beginning, when you're small, when you have limited resource and capital. You don't want to have two CEO. You don't want two CSO. You don't want two legal counsel. You don't want two business development team, right? Because you're small. One is enough for you to get started. So you want really look at the distribution of expertise and skill sets of your team member and make sure you have a good team. And then you want to see if you have a good idea. As I said earlier, good idea is not necessarily rare. There are a lot of good ideas. So with that being said, I try to remind each of you or all of you that since there are many, many good ideas there, don't just stick to your own, okay? You want to start a business, you want to have a successful business, so you don't have to stick to your idea. You should look around, you should ask around, you should survey around, you should investigate around to see if there are ideas that's better than yours, and then start with the best idea as you understand. And then certainly create a business model. This is actually a very hard part for a student, for new graduates to do, because you simply don't have much experience in terms of even understanding the business model, not to mention to identify a business model that's best for your ideas. So mentorship is very critical. Working with somebody is very important. So please do take advantages of resources around you. Take advantage of, there are many successful people in the society, and you should never be feel awkward or feel shy to ask people around. Sometimes I joke around because I invested probably more than 100 companies. When I look at a company which are successful versus company that are not successful, one very, very key fact I found is that the successful companies typically have founder or members, they have thick skin, 脸皮比较厚. So, because they have thick skin, they are not shy, they are not afraid of asking questions and going out looking for help. So that's very critical, especially at the very beginning for you to decide which business model is right for you. And then the last, of course, it's the least important among these 5 facts, but it's also important factor for you to be successful, which is the funding. You want to get money to support your idea, to support your team. In terms of funding, please also bear in your mind that it's not necessary to get as much money as possible at the very beginning. It's not, because at the beginning, the valuation of your company is very low. To get the same amount of funding, you have to pay a lot more shares when you start, compare when you are a little bit established. So you want to do sort of a stepwise fundraising, to get something that's enough for you to get going, and then you build up your company a little bit, so your company's valuation goes up, and then you get another round of the funding, and then you continue to do that. So those are the 5 facts I really, really want to mention. You really should remember. You really should keep them in your mind and say, okay, do I have those 5 facts figured out right? Particularly timing and the team, do I have them right? Because why timing is the most important, the time is the most precious one. Everything else, you can get them, you can restart them, but time, when you lose them, you don't have them. So if you are not on the right track, don't waste your time, okay? So continue to examine yourself, ask those questions. Do I have the right facts for me to continue to drive my startup to be successful? So we talked about timing. I want to really spend some time about timing. Timing actually means take a good ride, take a ride of the big wave the society is moving. You never want to ride against the wave, especially the big wave of the whole society is moving. Nowadays, for example, the digital, the internet, the wireless, that's the big wave. You really shouldn't, really should take a ride on those waves and move forward with the wave, but never be against those waves. So one example I want to use here, which is for good timing, is the story about Stanford. Stanford actually is very interesting. This is the slides I used about 1 month ago. I did a presentation at the Hong Kong U's senior management retreat. So we examined some university and compare those universities against the Hong Kong U and to try to figure out what are the facts that makes a university be successful, be the top university. So I looked all the way back for Stanford, from go back all the way to 1920 to 1950. It's actually quite consistent that Stanford was ranked as about 14th or 15th or 13th in that time. Well, not bad, but it's not top tier. It's not a global university. It's a leading regional university. And then because it's not a top tier and it didn't do much innovation, it was a pure teaching and plus a little bit of researching university there. By 1950, Stanford actually had difficulty to have money to run its business. So starting from 1950, Stanford hired Dr. Fred Terman, who is being called as the father of Silicon Valley. So what he did is he moved from MIT to Stanford, and then he said that the university didn't have money. We have to do something to help the university to get money, to get enough funding, so that we can support the operation of the university. Plus, if we want to move on, we want to be the top university, we have to have a larger operation, which means we will have to have more students, we will have to spend more money on research, and we have to have a larger endowment. So that's what he did. He worked with faculties in the universities and identified many opportunities in create a startup like a Hewlett Packard and a lot of semiconductor companies in those times, and eventually turned Silicon Valley. At that time, it's like an agriculture region, which grows a lot of fruits, orchid, and produce some social wine. So it grew Silicon Valley out of that into a very, very successful cutting edge, high-tech area, which by itself drive the Stanford University to the second among the top university. And nowadays, nobody doubts if Stanford is a top university or not. So what I try to say is that, well, since most of our audience here are in some way related or associated to Hong Kong U, what I want to say is for the university, for the Hong Kong University, right now, we are pushing for innovation. The title of my presentation at the Senior Management Retreat is actually the innovation at the third pillar for Hong Kong U vision. So what does that mean is that the university has agreed to pushing innovation as it's the newest and the most important initiative moving forward. The two pillars, if you know university well, is teaching and researching, right? So Hong Kong U has been doing quite well in terms of teaching. We're doing okay in terms of researching compared with top university in the world. We are not top, but we're okay. We hope to add innovation as the third pillar to the university so that the success of innovation could in a way similar to what Dr. Kerman did to the Stanford University by bringing back the reward from commercialization to fund more research, to fund more students, so that the Hong Kong U could move on to be a real top university. So that's the wave, that's the big wave within the university. So this is why I want to really share that with you and applaud you taking the opportunity and taking the risk to be an entrepreneur to start your company. These are on the screen, these are some numbers I want to share with you. If you look at some major universities in mainland of China, and you will see that some university, they're ranking higher than Hong Kong U, some are lower, but a lot of them, or most of them, actually have a very significant income, which is highlighted here as an orange color. That income is being called as enterprise income, or in Chinese is 事业收入. So for Tsinghua University or Peking University or Fudan University, they all have a very large enterprises, which are the companies started by their faculty, their students, their postdocs, etc. And the university spend a lot of time incubate them, provide them with the technologies, funding, people's resources, space, etc. And after 15 to 20 years, they actually become very, very successful. So if you look at the income in 2019 for this university, a very big chunk from the enterprise income. And if you look at Peking U as example, that's 5 billion. That's 5 billion RMB, a huge amount of money. The total operation budget for Hong Kong U is 9 billion Hong Kong dollar, which is about 8 billion RMB. And for Peking U by itself, its company, they incubate can bring in 5 billion. If you look at Tsinghua, it brings in 8.7 billion RMB, which is more than 9 billion Hong Kong dollar that funded the whole Hong Kong U. So we really want to drive Hong Kong U to do more innovation, to do more commercialization. We want to work with you as students, staff, faculty, to help you to be successful so that eventually the innovation, the commercialization will bring in same or similar sets of money to the Hong Kong U to support its continuing expansion of teaching and researching. So let's start to look at the figure on the right. That's the startup figure from MIT, which is one of the top universities doing very, very well in terms of commercialization and innovation. But if you look at them, if we started from 2007, it started about 12 companies, 12 startups, but 6 or 7 failed. So that's 50% of them fell, close to 50% of them fell. Look at 2008, 2009, 2010, they're almost about the same. 40 to 50% fell, especially in 2010. And then they hired a new director of TTO and start doing something different. Then you look at the numbers starting from 2011 all the way to this is on my screen to 2016. That's the newest data we have. You can see the successful rate is much, much higher. And also the number of startups, there are a lot more, a much larger number of startups after 2010. I mean, certainly, first it's a big wave of the society, right? The Boston area, the whole United States become very, very focusing on commercialization, on innovation. But one very important fact that the success rate become much higher or the failure rate become much smaller is because the university spend a lot of time to incubate those startups instead of just license the IP to them and let them struggle, let them sort of evolve themselves. Then if you go back to look at the figure on the left side, that's the sort of, a typical financial or financing life cycle for the startup. Usually, you start up with some idea or some IPs, but if you look at the cash flow, very quickly, at the very beginning, people don't give you a lot of money because you're not experienced, you don't have a lot of credibility, and your idea, maybe you think are very good, but some other people, especially venture capitalists, which have seen lots of proposals, they may not see your idea is that smart or is that unique. So typically you will run out of cash very quickly. And that's what's being called a death valley of startup. Because that's the time you really struggle. You don't have a lot of money and you are not well established. Your product, you're still working on your product, it's not on market. So how do we cross the death valley for a startup? That's the big deal. So what MIT did at the time, as I already said earlier, is providing incubating time, which first help the company to reduce the expense, right? So, the space usually it's very cheap to rent. Sometimes they are free. And also the Incubate provide a good back office support such as legal, business development, accounting, etc. So that way, it will reduce the cash flow for startup. And certainly, those incubators typically are either within the university or near the university campus. So you get a chance to work very closely, to interact very closely with the professor and other people who have the expertise. It's actually very, very hard to do a startup and make it successful by your own. You really need to get help from people. So when you're around the people, the chance you will able to get help is much higher, right? If you are in a university, you go to cafeteria, you may bump into some professor, you may bump into some postdoc. They happen to have certain idea, or you may bump to someone like me as a director of TTO or iDendron that when you chat with me, I say, hey, this is great. Maybe I can introduce you to a venture firm, or if I know some company who happen to be looking for such idea, I can introduce you to them. So that will increase the probability of you being successful. So around the people asking for help, very, very important. So this is what I try to emphasize, which is the incubator provided by the university, that incubating the startup are actually a very critical, important fact to help the startup to cross the Death Valley. So the work Lawrence, Taurus, Amy are doing in running the iDendron is very critical. It's very helpful. And I hope you enjoy working with them. If there are any area for improvement, or you feel there are certain things we are not doing well, please let Lawrence and his people know, or you can even let me know if you feel it's necessary. So then we'll say, okay, now you start a startup, right? As I said, the timing is very important. How do you decide the timing is right by looking at the wave? And then once you know the timing is right and you get a good team, and then you want to look at your idea. What you want to do is to make sure the idea you are working on to build your company is in line with the big trend of the whole society. That's, again, in a way, is riding the wave. That's, again, in a way, is the timing. So here, I just copied the top 10 technology trend for 2020 that was published by MIT at the beginning of the year. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going to each of those ideas, but you can see, those are the typical usual suspect. If you are entrepreneur, you most likely already read about them, right? So the quantum, in terms of quantum computing, the quantum security, etc. Healthcare, very, very important. How do we personalize healthcare? How do we use AI to improve the efficiency or effectiveness of healthcare? And also, the whole societies, especially the developed world, are aging very quickly, including Hong Kong. So when we age, we will have a more health problem, which is bad. But on the other way, it expands the market for any innovation to take the advantage. And then space. Space is big. I don't know if you watched the launch of SpaceX yesterday. That was quite interesting, and I think the space tourism is at the same point as the aviation industry was in 1930. So in 10 or 15 years, I bravely predict in 10, 15 years a lot of people are going to get on the rocket and get into the space and have a tourism going circle around the Earth and see how wonderful to be in the space. Finance, digital money, I don't need to say much. Living in Great China, I think this is one of the area the digitalization of the money is being most active. Environment, climate change, and we all want to live in a beautiful environment. We don't want pollution, etc. We want clean water. We want our food to be safe. So environment is very, very important. And the consumer, well, consumer nowadays, almost if you look at almost every big internet company, their focus is consumer. Apple, the number one, the largest market cap company focusing on consumer. Google focusing on consumer. The Facebook, Microsoft, etc. So I don't have to say much for you to realize that consumer is actually a big, big area that you may want to take advantage to think about your idea to run the startup. So every year, checking against those major universities when they publish the top technology or top trends for business, etc. Just make sure you are riding the wave. You are not at the end of the wave. You are not against the wave. Because if you are you are riding on the wave, it's much easier to be successful. So I have to talk a little bit about life science because Lawrence told us know that my background is in life science mostly. So they asked the question, what is the most important area or the hottest area in life science? That's actually a relatively easy question to answer. It's the oncology, it's the cancer, because there are a few reasons why cancer is the area that attract most of investment and also provide the most of opportunity. One is that cancer, it's an age-related diseases. In the older days, people live much shorter. So they don't have the opportunity to develop cancer. Cancer is the growth of cell without control. And typically the cell growth within our body is controlled by our DNA, by our genes. And our gene works very, very reliably, very, very accurately. So it has a error rate below like 1 billionth, 1 out of 1 billion. So that's very, very low. And typically, if a person only lives 20 to 30 years, that control mechanism, that reliability, 1 out of 1 billionth is good enough. So that the cell control will never make any mistake. But now we live much longer. People live to 60, 70, 80, 90s. And then 1 out of 1 billionth reliability is not reliable enough. So you start to see the cell circle, the growth of cell start to make mistake at the probability of 1 out of 1 billionth. So the more people live longer, the more cancer patients you will see. So this is why it's interesting that the richest country usually has the highest number or highest incidence of cancer. Simply, it's just because they live longer. The figure on the left side is globally in terms of the deal or the funding for the different therapeutic area. As you can see, the largest one, the blue one, is cancer. And then we compare that to China. It's also the blue. It's a little bit even longer in terms of funding because China is catching up to develop cancer drug. So that's why the funding opportunity or the license opportunity is even more than those in United States. So this figure is from Beijing, which is one of the best biotech company in China. Then beyond the life science, I purposely asked Lawrence and Taurus to allow me to talk a little bit beyond the life science for the reason that to do startup in life science is very hard because typically it demands huge amount of capitals and it need lots of experience, expertise. And typically, if you work in the biotech area, if you're not a PhD, you most likely you end up as a technician, which is very, very different from some other area. For example, in the IT area, I mean, if you're a bachelor or even you're a dropout, like Bill Gates, you can be very successful. But in the life science area, if you're a dropout, you almost have no chance. If you're not a PhD, you almost don't have a chance. That's why I want to expand a little bit beyond life science by looking at this new slides. This is very, very fresh. I received this data from CICC, Zhongjing Gongsi, which is one of the largest VC firm in mainland of China. The report came out on November 10, which is just about a week ago. So you look at the opportunity that AI and 5G provide. So those the opportunity actually runs through almost every area, right? So if you look at on the left, it started from 互联网传媒, right? Internet media, smart city, consumer electronics, finance,零售, I forgot the English word, I don't do 零售 that much.
Retail.
Oh, right, retail, yes. Thank you. And then education, logistics, manufacturing, medicine, 汽车 auto, right? So it covers almost every area. And then if you look at the sort of the technology used across those areas that will be impacted by AI and 5G, you started with the 计算机视觉, which is the visualization using the computer or the visualization provided by computer. And then the natural language processing and the language recognition, and then the 物联网, so the all the matters, everything connected, right? So these I think are really a good summary of the opportunities that exist within this bigger wave of AI and 5G. So I will send that document, which has a lot more details to Lawrence, and then for any of the audience who are interested in reading more, you can get in touch with Lawrence or Taurus, and they can provide you with a copy. So I think, by looking at these figures very, very carefully and identify where the opportunity you have and where you are could potentially help you to think if you are working on the right idea. Or if you want to start, you haven't started. If you want to start, it may be able to help you to think if you are thinking on the right track. So one area you look at this is the if you look at the medicine or healthcare, it's the 影像诊断, right? Basically diagnostics using imaging. So for that, I do want to use an example from one of the company from iDendron. It's called a Hollow, right? I don't know how many of you heard about it, but it's a very, very successful company. What it does is that it uses imaging, basically uses a phone to take a picture or take a video of you while you are speaking, so that the algorithm behind will try to figure out if you are depressed or not. As some of you may know, depression is a very, very big problem of the modern societies. I saw data that basically says, if you look at the top 500 companies in the world, the top 500 largest company in the world, 80% of their CEO are depressed, okay? So that's the nature of the modern society. fast speed, high pressure, very demanding, and changing very quickly. So a lot of people are depressed. But the problem for depression is very hard to diagnose. Typically, the current method, if you go to a physician, you say, hey, I don't feel well, I might be depressed. The way a physician diagnoses you is by asking questions such as, do you eat well? Do you sleep well? Do you want to go out with your friend? Do you want to kill yourself? Do you want to get up in the morning? Do you want to go out to work, etc.? So those are relevant questions, but they are not objective. The answers are not objective. They are very objective. So to diagnose depression is a very subjective practice currently. And if a disease cannot be diagnosed objectively, the treatment just cannot be right. So the very first important thing for depression treatment is to do a better diagnosis. So this company, Vall, is using the imaging to do that. And it makes sense. It actually makes common sense. Everybody can just close your eye and imagine a bit, and you start to say, hey, this makes sense. Because we are happy, our facial expression is different. We are not happy, our facial expression is very, very different, right? So when I'm excited, you can look at me, or you can tell, you say, hey, this guy is excited. If I'm depressed, I'm not in good mood. You can also tell, hey, this guy is not in a good mood. So using that imaging technology to diagnose depression is really smart idea. And the company won the 2020 Microsoft Imaging Cup World Championship. That's a very big deal. I lived in Seattle for many, many years, and I worked with the CEO of Seattle. I worked with Bill Gates. I know Microsoft very, very well. So I know this championship is really, really big deal. And I think I remember, Lawrence shared with me that this company is as a reward, they will receive $300,000 or so US dollar as their prize. But most importantly, they get opportunity to be mentored by CEO of Microsoft. That's, in my opinion, much, much bigger deal than the $300,000 US dollars. So, because how often anyone in the world can get an opportunity to be mentored for half a day by CEO of Microsoft, which is one of the top 5 company in the world. You can learn a lot. You will build a connection. They most likely, they meant when Sasha is the CEO of Microsoft. When Sasha mentored you, he is a very good person, very sincere, very honest, very reliable person. So if he mentors you, usually he will keep a good connection with you, and you can always go back to ask him for help, any type of help. And within his authority, he will provide very, very useful help. So that's a really, really big deal. And I just want to share this with you for those of you who haven't noticed yet, to increase your confidence that, hey, actually, iDendron is a really good incubate. If you work in the iDendron, there's a great opportunity. You can become a world championship. You could get an opportunity to work with the people like Sasha, who is the CEO of Microsoft, etc. So another idea or example I want to share with you is the COVID-19 vaccine. Some of you may know that Hong Kong is very good in developing vaccine against the COVID-19. It started very early in March. We already got a funding from Bill Gates Foundation, and then we moved on. We got an approval by the Chinese FDA. So the vaccine currently is undergoing clinical trial. And you may ask why we don't do clinical trial in Hong Kong, because simply Hong Kong doesn't have a vaccine company, so that we cannot manufacture vaccine, which is required by the regulatory to be manufactured in the GMP, good manufacturing practice, which is a global standard for anything that are going to be used by human. So the vaccine is in clinical trial in mainland China, and then recently we received another round of support from the Gates Foundation with a 489 million US dollar, which is close to 40 million Hong Kong dollar to continue the clinical trial. So with that, we are very confident, we feel very good, and we also think that the COVID-19 is most likely going to be like a flu. It's not going to go away. It's going to be around us, but in a very controllable, way, similar to the flu, that it's there, but we can coexist with the flu virus. But with that, what we want to do is that we say, hey, Hong Kong doesn't have a vaccine company. How about we build a vaccine company? For several reasons. One is that with the vaccine company, it will help the development of new vaccine. Currently, Hong Kong, as I said earlier, develop vaccine very, very well, but because it doesn't have a company here, we have to move to mainland of China to collaborate with a vaccine company in mainland China to continue to develop, which is okay. But when the border is closed, we just got to stop, right? The border is still being closed in a way. So the communication, exchange of material, exchange of personnel is very, very challenging. So that slows our things down significantly. If we have a vaccine company in Hong Kong, that would be great. And secondly, which is most important, that right now we start to hear news that while US successfully developed the 2 vaccines with efficacy for about 90 or 94%, and mainland China also have successfully developed their vaccine and moved into phase 3 clinical trial. And they eventually will get a vaccine. But how about Hong Kong? Are we going to get a vaccine? Oh, well, eventually we're going to get a vaccine, but probably not at the very beginning, because at the beginning, the supply is going to be tight, right? Everybody is going to supply the vaccine to their own citizens. They are now just don't have a spare vaccine to give to Hong Kong. So I think, when you start to hear news that, wow, the US people are getting vaccine, the mainland China people are getting vaccine, the European people are getting vaccine, and the Hong Kong people are not, you will start to feel not good about Hong Kong. You may feel concerned. So I think, knowing the COVID-19 will be eventually under control, but with the modern world or current lifestyle, something, similar to COVID-19 would happen again, just like we had a SARS before, and then we had a MERS, and now we have COVID-19, and we'll have something again in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever. So to have a vaccine company that will allow us to develop vaccine and also assure the Hong Kong citizen will have vaccine at the very first time point when vaccine is successfully developed is very, very important. So we're putting together a vaccine manufacturing company together with a potential investment of Hong Kong $1 billion. Why I talk about this for discuss with you as an entrepreneurship? Really, I want you to know is that when I start to work on this, everybody told me it's impossible. Hong Kong is too expensive. There's no land, no factory. Nobody want to do this. There's lots of no. But when I look at this, I say, hey, this. If I work on this is the right way. This timing is right because the Hong Kong people, the Hong Kong society need a vaccine, need this COVID-19 vaccine. So the timing is right. And then we have a right team. We have a Hong Kong professor, KY Yuan, Tong Chen, etc. They are very wonderful in developing vaccine. So I have the right team. And then I have a great idea, which is for this vaccine, very different from other COVID-19 vaccine, is a nasal spray. Most of vaccine developed by other companies, they require injection. And this vaccine is nasal spray. You don't need to get injection, you just spray into your nose. So that's a great idea. That's a unique idea. And then, so I already, put a checkbox on these 3 facts, and then I looked at the 4th fact, which is the business model. I say, hey, we do have a business model here because Hong Kong brand commands some premium. So if a vaccine is manufactured in mainland China that is being sold for $300, I could potentially sell Hong Kong manufactured vaccine developed by Hong Kong you for $500. I think a lot of people are very willing to pay $200 more to buy the brand name of the Hong Kong U vaccine. So that gives me the right business model that I will have a sustainable business. And then certainly, funding, which is the last fact. Certainly, when all the first 4 facts, I'm able to put a checkbox on all those first 4 facts, I'm able to get funding. So I want to share with you that sometimes when you have a big idea, you have to be persistent. At the end of the day, it's not smart people win, it's the persistent people win. Look at Steve Jobs. I mean, how persistent he is. He failed so many times. And he was even fired by his own company and then come back and make Apple a very successful company. Look at Ma Yun, right? Everybody heard the story how many times Ma Yun was rejected when he applied for job, for employment opportunity, how many times he went out to want to raise funds for his Alibaba. But look at that, how successful he is. So again, believe me, I'm old enough and I saw enough. I can be very, very sure, tell you that at the end of the day, it's not the smart people win, it's the people who are persistent, who are willing to adapt themselves, who are willing to change themselves win. So next slide, also talking about riding the wave, I do want to share with you that Hong Kong U has also a lot of initiative potentially in bigger Bay Area, which is something you really want to look into that because Great Bay Area just simply provide one of the largest opportunity at this time. The government, the Mainland China government is going to provide a lot of money into this, and there are a lot of large initiatives there. The university are also going to put efforts there. And it just simply, it has a huge population there that is eventually lead to the whole population of Mainland China, which is 1.4 billion, compared with 7.5 million people in Hong Kong. It's just simply much, much larger. So when you look at the market, you will want to go to the places where the market is huge. When you do research, we typically say scientists don't have boundary. For you run business, businessmen even have no boundary. In the old days, Columbus go to India, go to North America. In China, 郑和, which is a business person, just 郑和下这个西洋, right? So as a business person, you go where the market is. You don't want to bound yourself by your geographic residence. So that's all I want to share with you. A lot of thoughts from many different angles, from many of my different experience, etc. And to talk about entrepreneurship, I could talk about 3 days, but I have 30 minutes. So I tried to pick up the most relevant facts, issues that I hope that's going to be helpful to you. With that, I thank you, and I wait here for Taurus to tell me what to do.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. He, for the sharing, and happy to learn about all the vaccine and the GBA initiatives that Hong Kong U that we're doing. There are plenty of opportunities ahead. I know you are running out of time. I just take one question that might be interesting for you. Is that do you think that COVID-19 brings more opportunities to life science startups? Any wild idea that university students can work on this global problems?
Absolutely. I think, to do a vaccine will be challenging for students, right? That's too bad. But the diagnostic is a huge area. Actually, there are a lot of company, COVID-19 diagnostic company in US. They are started by postdoc. They are started by very junior faculty because the diagnostics, it's actually relatively straightforward, right? It's a PCR. You run nucleic acid testing. So it's not that hard. And plus, if you can simplify that by, make it turnaround time quicker, shorter, or even just processing the data will be very, very helpful. So there are a lot of readings there. You can really read and identify where the opportunity is. But I would suggest you start to look at the diagnostics first, and then also think about the opportunities that you may want to develop certain solutions, certain digital solutions for monitoring, for after diagnostic care. Or after disease care, right? I mean, nowadays we say, oh, a person is infected, and then if he recovers, we assume everything is going back to normal. But that's not. Actually, there are a lot of work could be done to follow up with that person and provide care, or even getting data from him or her. That will be very useful for developing new drug also.
Great. And then I trust that there are a lot of foundations or funding out there that are supporting the COVID-19 solutions, because it will last for a while. So Taurus, maybe you can share the upcoming events to our audience to wrap up the session.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. Wait a minute. Okay, so we still have lots of upcoming events, even though we are closing to the ends of the semester one. So we have the social innovation competitions hub prize at Hong Kong Youth. So the annual challenge is about the food industry. So if you're interested, do visit their website and their Facebook page. And also we have the MEMC bootcamp again. So the deadline will be the end of this month. So don't miss it.
Yeah, this one is organized by the MIT Innovation Node. Yeah, so just give a try if you have time.
Yeah, so for next session, we will have Mr. Jason Chiu, CEO and founders of Chervik. So just don't miss it. So thank you, Dr. He, for the great sharing, covering the startup life cycles, Hong Kong advantages, and the new trends in the life science. So I think that's the end of today's session. So let's see you next week. Bye-bye, all the participants. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. He.
See you all next week.
Bye-bye. See you.
Bye.